Hailey McMullen. The annual Harvest Festival in Deerfield Township, Ohio, turned into a nightmare when a young kid lost her life on one of the rides. The tragedy occurred on the Extreme Sizzler ride, leaving everyone in shock and disbelief. This is the story of what happened on the tragic day when Hailey Lynn McMullen died after being thrown out of a moving ride. Stay tuned as we uncover how the lack of safety measures on the ride and other regulatory decisions led to this terrible incident. Born in Vineland on the 28th of January 2009, Hailey Lynn McMullen was a sweet and innocent girl. She had a heart of gold and was kind to everyone she met. Hailey had big dreams of becoming a vet or even a YouTuber, but her story takes a dark turn on the 12th of October 2019, when Hailey and her family went to the Harvest Festival in Deerfield Township to celebrate Columbus Day. The Harvest Festival was meant to be a time of celebration and joy, but it turned into a nightmare. Skelly Amusements, a ride operator, was hired to provide the attractions, and one of these attractions was the Extreme Sizzler. This ride was not for the faint of heart. Riders were suspended in cars and spun around in circles at high velocity. There was a safety bar, but no seatbelts. And on that fateful day of the 12th of October, Hailey climbed aboard the Extreme Sizzler. What happened next was a tragedy that shook the town to its core. As the ride spun faster and faster, little did Hailey know that the horror was only just beginning. She was tossed around on her seat, despite the boy next to her trying to hold on. She slipped under the protective barrier, and the boy desperately clung to her thigh, but it was no use. Suddenly, she fell off the ride and onto the operating platform, leaving her in the path of the 12 fast-spinning cars. As she struggled to get up, the cars repeatedly struck her, pinning her down and keeping her unconscious. Can you imagine the terror that her grandmother and siblings must have felt as they watched this gruesome scene unfold before their very eyes? They immediately called for emergency personnel, but unfortunately, it was too late. Hailey had suffered injuries to her head and brain, and she was declared dead that very same night. The community was left in shock and disbelief. How could this happen to such a sweet child with so much life ahead of her? People wanted answers, and they wanted to know who was to blame for this terrible incident. The investigation revealed that Hailey barely met the minimum height requirements to board the ride, but she was not given the appropriate seat meant for smaller riders. To make matters worse, the ride lacked seatbelts, despite the manufacturer's recommendation that they should be included. It's hard to imagine how such a tragedy could occur when there was clear recommendations in place to prevent it. The manufacturer even sent bulletins to companies like Skelly Amusements recommending that operators install seatbelts on the ride. But sadly, this advice was ignored not once, but twice. The investigation also discovered that one of the ride operators had initially disqualified Hailey from boarding the ride, but his decision was overruled by a senior ride operator. It's heartbreaking to think if only Hailey had been denied access to the ride, she would still be with us today. Despite the lawsuits filed by Hailey's family against the companies involved, the trials are still ongoing. It's a product liability lawsuit that was filed in by Hailey's grandmother. Hailey's mother and her siblings witnessed the tragedy unfold before their eyes. Can you imagine the emotional distress they must have been going through? The lawsuit is alleging negligence and liability on the part of the manufacturer and operator of the product. It's seeking compensatory and punitive monetary damages. The question on everyone's mind is, will justice be served? Will the manufacturer and operator be held accountable for the tragedy that has forever changed the McMullen family? It's like justice is being delayed and the community is still in misery. But let's not forget who Hailey was. She was more than just a victim of a tragic incident. She was a beautiful little girl, inside and out, who had a heart full of love and adventure. It's hard not to feel a sense of loss when we think about all that Hailey could have been. But let's remember her for who she was and let her spirit live on in our hearts. Do you think this tragic death could have been prevented? Let us know in the comments.